Hey, and welcome back, everybody. As you can see, I am awash in a sea of pink. This is a client project that I've been working on for the past few weeks. It is the original idea was to do a battle force of Chaos Space Marines, and specifically the Angels of Ecstasy, which is a Slaanesh clan of CSM. This is going to be the first project where I've done a predominantly pink force, and since I know not all of you are, are pretty much in the same boat that I have been, which is never done it before, not really quite sure how to approach it, I thought that I would share my progress with you. So as you can see, though, the bulk of the Chaos Space Marines are done. I have just this one guy left right here who needs to be painted, and so I'm going to go over the process with you with that one, and then when I'm all done, the whole, well, this is two squads worth of Chaos Space Marines will be done. Now let's get to how we get started here. Alright, so my current method for doing Space Marines is to do primary assembly, but leave some elements off where they need to be left off. With these guys, I did a lot of conversions so that they were holding bolters in one hand, and then maybe having a close combat weapon in the other hand. And in that case, I would glue the arms on. But in the cases where it was a standard pose, I would leave the arms off, but I would actually glue the gun to the arms, or hands really, but then leave the whole thing off of the shoulders. And that was a tricky process, whereby I would either putty the shoulders into place so that when the glue set it was in the proper position, or I would just hold it by hand, or I would just guesstimate when I was gluing it. So yeah, so anyway, then anything that was going to be glued later would get a little blob of putty, so like right here at the neck, and right here where the backpack's going to go, and then of course if the arms are going, or the arms are going on later, then that would also get a bit of putty on the, both on the arm side and the shoulder side. And then it was ready for airbrushing, which is what I did. Now my primary color here should not be surprising. It is Emperor's Children, which is a really nice rich pink. But then I mixed it with a little white and airbrushed down from the top to just provide an initial highlight. And I gotta say, although I did do that, it wasn't necessary. If I was going to make that a brighter highlight or really get into it and do sort of directional lighting, then it would have been worthwhile. But in this case, not so much. So just a coat of pink would work out just fine, or Emperor's Children, as the case may be. So let's go on to the next step then. Okay, so the next step here is to apply the wash, and what I've done is created a 50-50 mix of Carroburg Crimson and Lamian Medium. For those who don't know, Lamian Medium is essentially the shades without pigment. So it is essentially the clear medium that they apply pigment to create their shades, which means it is the perfect medium for thinning them down. You can go full strength on this if you want. It's going to create a almost berry-like color if you do that when you're done, and that's fine because you're going to go back and layer the some more pink on this after the fact, and you might even end up with more contrast between your highlights and shadows, and you may want that. So you can, you can kind of do this to taste. I mean, everything I do, I'm showing you what I did, and not so much how you should necessarily do it, unless you want it to look exactly like I did it, which is fine. That's good. Something to keep in mind, I'm still getting used to using these new shades, and I've been using them since day one when the new paint sets came out, but the thing that seems the most different to me, aside from the fact that they definitely seem to have a stronger pigment to them, is that you can't be quite as heavy-handed with them as you were with the old ones. With the old ones, you could practically dip and wick and get a good result. With these, if you do that, if you're really heavy-handed with it, you'll find that they pool, and where they pool, the color actually turns white and then cracks. So you can't leave any really big puddles of wash in there. Alright, that looks like I got it all. Pretty sure. So now I gotta let that dry. Oh, missed a spot right there. Yeah, with washes it's always really important that you carefully look it over, because trying to match it again later is a pitch. So, yeah, so I'm going to let that dry and then I'll come back. So, after the wash is dried, I go back in with the base color, in this case Emperor's Children, and I reapply it, layering it in, if you will. This is one of the layer paints. To start the highlight process, and I've actually mixed the paint with a bit of, well, in this case airbrush medium actually, and the reason is that I want to, it's a way to thin it without destroying the integrity of the paint, which water or other things like that can do. And I'm avoiding using Lamian medium in this case because, and it would work, it would do exactly what I want to do, which is thin it and keep the integrity, but since I have a coat of shade on there, the problem with Lamian medium is that it will re-wet itself, and that means that if you apply essentially like a second coat of shade over your first coat, it will affect it, effectively making it, breaking it down as if you had applied like a thinner to it. So we don't want that. We don't want that to happen. What we want to have happen is for the layer to do its job and just create a nice coat of paint that blends well with the underlying shade so that we can get this highlight started. So yes, I have discovered this attribute of Lamian medium in previous projects where, I'd go back in and try and use it in this way, and then I found myself essentially painting off the underlying shade and creating kind of ugly splotches, and that's no good. We don't want that. Alright, well, get this away from the camera real quick so that I can see it better, and then we'll go on to the next step. So I will be back in a second. Alright. So as you can see, I've already gotten things a little started here. I just wanted to make sure that my black mix was up to snuff. So the interesting thing about how I'm doing the black here is that it's almost like a thick wash, and the reason is so that I get some highlighting and some shadow all in one, just by laying down this slightly transparent black color. And I'm going to do my best here, but this is hard to do with the camera in front of me. So anyway, like with a wash, the black flows into the recesses, but it leaves a little bit of the underlying pink exposed, and then gives you a nice range of hues, and yet at the end of the day it's still black, and will read as black when you look at it. And black is a really tough color to work with when you want it to be, you want to say this is black, but if you paint it black, it looks like crap because it's very flat, very lifeless, doesn't look real, doesn't look good. And yet, I know in my early days of painting, always asking myself, well, what else can you do with black? There's a lot you can do. Oh, sorry about that. Like I said, it's kind of tough having the camera here. It's actually hanging from a piece of pipe, which is connected to a camera stand. And by camera stand, I mean tripod. Camera stand. Yeah. See? A little messy. That's all right. Alright, I'm going to go do this off camera and I'll be back. I may also just lay in some basic black over the over the weapons here. So if I come back and those look like work has been done, well, that's what happened, and it's just black, straight black, that kind of ugly black. I'll be back. Alright, see? Got all the black in. I even base coated this little thing white, because that's also going to be pink later on. And now I want to do some bright highlighting and not slop paint over everything. So this is really going to be edge highlighting for the most part. It's really nice to bring in the final kind of pop to the color. Makes everything kind of jump out at you. So again, this is just that same Emperor's Children with even more white than before. Doesn't go absolutely everywhere, just where it really makes sense. You know, anything that really sticks out, anything that's gonna want that extra bit of pop. This is one of those cases where less is more. I could do more with the feet down here, but they're going to get a fairly heavy weathering. So I'm not going to worry about it very much. had already painted the head that I'm going to be using. I haven't done his eyes yet though. And I think I'm going to highlight the backpack with this color. And then I'm going to block in some of the base pink onto the chain sword and onto the little flourish here on the back. And then I'll come back, because that's just base coating. You don't need to see that. I'll be back. So I've been trying to experiment with these dry paints, and on this model I did a lot of experimentation actually using the Changeling pink. Now here's the funny part. Not really using it so much on the pink. I mean, a little bit here and there on my other models. I don't know that I'm even going to bother doing it so much here, but I did use it on the little flourish here at the end of the chain sword, and I like it. But that's also going to get a wash over it eventually. But where I've been using it, strangely enough, is on the black. Because I wanted to give the black an edge highlight. And while I can mix up this color with pink and white and some medium and what have you, and you know, get essentially this color. But what I liked about using this over that is that the dries seem to have seem to be a little bit transparent. So especially for this purpose, you know, especially working on black, that's real helpful, because you don't want it to be super stark, or you know, you don't want it to be just jumping out at you. You want it to be pretty subtle, and this really works. And I did try doing this both ways, both with the dry and with a paint I mixed myself, and I liked the dry better. And you might ask yourself why I'm highlighting the black with pink, to which I would respond, why wouldn't I? If the other nice thing about doing it this way is that if this, you know, if I get some on the pink, it's no big deal. There's really not that much paint on there, so you can't really screw it up. You can, however, screw up the black, which I'm trying not to do. I have been doing, you know, like a little bit of highlight on even the broad surfaces, like on the skull, and just to look like a light reflection. And the end result is pretty nice. I like it just fine. And then if you end up with too much, if it starts looking too kind of, I don't know, if the black starts looking too powdery, then you can go in essentially into the center of the black and darken it back in, and you know, just make sure that you're leaving the edges your highlight color. Which I will go back and do later. Alright, so, oh yeah, I forgot these two. This is a little bit on the top, just to provide the reflection. I usually just do the outer edge right here on these, and then just a bit on that. And again, I can go back in later. And notice how little paint I'm actually using. It's always the important thing about doing a dry brush. So anyway, that's good there. And so I'm going to be similarly circumspect with my bolt gun dry brushing. I've been trying to make it more about edge highlighting than full dry brushing. This is Lead Belcher, by the way. I should leave that open because I will probably want to come back to that. Alright, and this is going both on the bolter and on the chainsword. And, you know, there's two ways to approach it. One is you can just, you know, go over the whole thing liberally with your dry brush. But, like I said, I've been trying to make this more about a darker color with edge highlights. So it's okay to get it elsewhere, but I'm really trying to hit the corners harder than anything else. So you get the catch lights from that, but the whole thing still stays really dark, except down here on those get a more liberal treatment. But this also kind of gives you a look at the difference between the two. See how that's more sort of fully coated, and these are more individually highlighted at the edges. Now I didn't go back. I could have gone back with the brighter silver on this as well, but I'm trying to stay dark, so I'm not gonna do that. All right. So then, yeah, the chainsword blade. Let's get that out of there. I think I was blowing away the video. So this you can be more liberal on. The little chainsword motor area. And I'm not too worried about getting this onto the pink there because it's chainsword. It's going to get grubby. It's going to get dinged. It's, you know, the paint is going to get knocked off and show through the metal. I'm not doing the hilt because that's no, I'm sorry, I am doing the hilt. For a second there I thought I was doing my Black Legion, but no, I am not. If this was a Black Legion chainsword, then that would be gold. Do I have one of those? I don't have one of those. Oh, I do. Like that. Alright, okay. That's so good. That looks good. Alright, I'll be back in a sec. So, as I said, I'm going to drop the wash onto the little sashy thing in the back. I'm going to go ahead and do full strength, dark, so it has a good contrast. It's like still staying with the color palette, but it's differentiating it from everything else. I'm also going to take this opportunity to throw some on the chainsword. Same thing, full strength, just throwing it on there. And again, to differentiate it from everything else. I'm not going to worry about that skull down there because I'll touch that up later. Alright, so I'm going to need to let stuff dry, and I'll come back in a bit. So as you can see, I've done some assembly work. because we're getting closer to the end, and I like to have this fully assembled as soon as possible. And right now I'm going to try and base coat the lenses of the eyes. I'm using P3 Signar Blue Base. That's only because that was, you know, I like, it's a good blue, and I don't have a good equivalent in Citadel right now. Nothing to say much about doing this part. It's not easy. Oh, damn it. So now I'm going to have to touch that up. I should have done this before I put it on. Alright, let that dry and touch it up. Be right back. So then the next step is highlight color. Let's see if I can do this. This is really, I'm just concentrating on the lower half. Man, more touch-up that's going to need to get done. Well, that's to be expected. That's good. That's good. And then I'm going to dot the back of the lens with the same color. Terribly accurate. But not bad. After the touch-up, that should look pretty good. By the way, so there's the, this is all dried here. There we go. Alright, so this is all dried. I kind of like how that turned out. There's a nice contrast between the shadow and highlight, but I might hit that again with the Changeling Pink. This is going to get some battle damage. Now I have some black already sitting on my palette over here, and I'm going to start just dinging the edge. With the black, just pretty much straight up black, a little thin down as usual, just so it'll flow. And this is essentially the beginning of paint chipping. So my my thinking with chain swords is that, you know, unless you're getting one fresh from the armory, it's going to be pretty battered. As with any weathering, you want to try and, you know, put some thought behind how it might actually realistically occur, so that you can get a more believable effect when you do it. So the black works as sort of an undercoat, and then you lay in, well, in this case, lead belcher over the top of it, leaving a dark edge. I'm sure you've seen any number of tutorials on doing faux paint chipping. And a lot of people like to use sort of non-metallic. I always tend to go for a more realistic approach. I like the way that metallics look in this situation. And you can essentially use the same technique on other parts of the armor as well, if you're so inclined to batter your Space Marines armor. It can look good. I like to not overdo it, and in this case I'm not really doing it much at all, or really on this guy at all. But again, if you were going to, shoulder pads are an obvious place to do chipping. Hands, because you're going to ding those things around all over the place. The tips of your toes, knees, really, elbows, anything that's going to stick out and scrape against something is a possibility for doing chipping. But you don't want to do like, under in the crotchular area, inside the thighs, unless he's doing something that, well, not befitting a Space Marine. Maybe a Slaanesh Space Marine, perhaps. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Let's do that final light dry brush on that little sash. Oh yeah, that's good. That's nice. That's nice. So I'm still figuring out these dry brush colors and what I like to do with them, but obviously in situations where you would normally dry brush, they work great. The only downside being the limit of colors that they have available. But I like it. This is what it reminds me of is I had started adding a little retarder to my paints before I would dry brush with them, which would keep them a little wet, and then the dry brushes would be smoother and less chalky, and that seems to be what they have done with this. Real quick, we seem to be marching through the steps here, but I'm going to base coat his base, because we're sort of getting close here, and I'm using Mornfang brown base. That's a nice natural tan, and then I'm going to dry brush over the top of that with Underhive Ash, which is kind of a weird color. It's almost like a kind of a greenish yellow, pale greenish yellow. But I like it. I like weird. Weird is good. I'm really thinning this down before I place it over, so that it kind of washes into the sand that I've got on the base. Alright, I'm going to let that dry and I'll be back. So, time to do the dry brush here. Kind of leave my brush a little bit more loaded than I normally do when I'm doing groundwork. Just, you know, especially when it's sort of a high contrast situation like this, I want to make sure that I'm getting the kind of coverage that I need. And it's okay to kick this up onto the feet of the model. It does help tie it into the ground. You can think of this as the sort of beginnings of your weathering. Now, speaking of that, I've been doing some washes of weathering pigment on these guys to really dust up the feet, and right now it's just sort of cleaning that up a little bit. So yeah, you can actually wash the pigments because they are you know, they will disperse in the water, and then when the water dries it just leaves behind the pigment, and it's not the same. I mean, although this is one of the elements of paint, without the binder or what have you, when it all dries, what you end up with is just pigment again. And this is just a way to sort of give it a more natural distribution, to make it look as if the model has kind of wandered through some muck, or maybe this is just sort of build up over time. So it's going to collect in the recesses as it would tend to do in real life. Now, because it is, when it dries, it is just going to be the powders again. You're still going to need to seal it in order to keep it from coming off due to handling. And I don't like to, so when I'm doing this, I don't like to go too far up. I like to keep it really centered on the feet. So I'm going to let that dry, and I'll be back. So after finishing the underhive ash, I went ahead and put black on the around the edge of the base. You can see that the weathering powder has dried, and it actually is very similar in color to the underhive ash. And we're pretty much done now. I think he fits in really well with all the others that I did previously. And at this point now I just need to go give them a good clear coat so that they're ready to play. But that's it, and I think I'll probably include photos at the end of this, so stay tuned, here they come.